Good morning. Who? Who let the air out? John Bigelow writes in We Are More, A Roadmap to Mastery, we are born into this life with complete freedom to choose whatever path we desire. We all begin in the consciousness of innocence, in a state of grace without concepts, ideologies, language, or fear. In this state of innocence, we are also totally present, completely in the moment, and fully expressed. Simple, direct, authentic. Within this state, there is no duality, there is no ego. The formation of an ego, the self-created identity, comes later as we begin to cross over into the next level of consciousness. The crossover begins with our very first breath. The rude awakening of our birth tears us from the serenity of our innocence and thrusts us into this physical realm with two basic gifts: an instinct to survive and freedom of choice. Neither is issued with an operator's manual. Everything that follows is a roll of the dice. We are overwhelmed with stimuli triggering our first gift, our instinct for survival. Think of your computer keyboard buffer or a modem speed if you were old enough to remember when those things mattered. The difference being that instead of all input eventually getting through, our buffer is more like a filter that simply rejects anything it does not recognize as critical in that moment for our survival. With experience, our capacity expands and we move beyond mere survival to some level of thinking for ourselves, where our second gift, freedom of choice, comes into play. We begin to socialize, seeking our place in the community around us. We start making choices that form the path of our experience. And all of this is done without any conscious participation on our part. Our ego, our self-identity, builds itself layer by layer like an onion from the inside out, and like unchecked artificial intelligence, begins dictating our behavior, our freely derived choices, based on its frequently imperfect interpretation of random inputs that exist without context. In short, our most motivated driving force, defining who we think we are and how we judge ourselves, is a house of cards built on a gasoline-soaked foundation of TNT. What could possibly go wrong? Embedded in my memory is the story I'm sure many of you have heard. It involves a man whose faith in God was unshakable, who one day, while listening to the radio, was advised that a very serious storm was coming and that the river by which he lived was likely to break out of its banks and flood the countryside. While his neighbors were packing their valuables hastily and moving to higher ground, he stood fast, saying, I have full faith in God to see that I am safely delivered from this coming disaster. True to the forecast, the rains came, the river flooded, and the man took refuge on the roof of his house. A boat came by and offered to take him to the safety of higher ground, but he said, I have full faith in my God to deliver me safely from this disaster. Soon his house began to shake and was torn from its foundation, began floating down the river, crashing into all the other debris being carried away by the waters. Miraculously, a helicopter appeared overhead and a rope was dropped to which he could be attached and plucked from the rapidly disintegrating building. But the man waved off the helicopter, shouting, I have full faith in my God to deliver me from this disaster. I will not show doubt in my faith. God will save me. The next thing he knew, the man was standing at the pearly gates, having to answer to St. Peter and his God. God, why did you forsake me? Couldn't you see that my faith was strong and I never doubted you would be there able to save me, he asked. God simply looked at the man and said, I gave you a warning on the radio. I sent a boat to pick you up, and I even risked the lives of that helicopter crew to rescue you. Your faith may have been strong, but you failed to recognize your God when it appeared to you," was the reply. The voice of God, or Spirit, if you prefer, is like a gentle gurgle of a flatland stream. We need to listen for it. Open our minds, bypass our filters, and let the word penetrate our being. Our egos, by comparison, roar like a spring melt waterfall, demanding our attention while the message of salvation goes unheard. The ego of our story's hero, his firm, self-righteous proclamation of his faith, was so loud that he was unable to grasp the messages being sent to him. His ego had defined what salvation would look like, so he was blind to salvation when it appeared. By this introduction, I stand before you this morning with a confession. My ego has been blinding me to the need to seek medical attention for far too long. The subtle voice of Spirit has been laying clues before me for longer than I can remember, and yet my ego, my sense of self-importance, has blinded me to the true message I should have been listening to. There is another story from my childhood memories about the farmer who was going to sell his mule because he couldn't get it to do anything. His neighbor came along and said, "Nonsense, it's a good strong animal, you just need to know how to handle it." "Well, go ahead and try," the farmer said to his neighbor. "Take him home and see what you can do." The second man began talking softly to the animal, to the mule, trying to get it to move. Eventually he started tugging on the reins, raising his voice to motivate the stubborn animal. Becoming aggravated, he eventually looked around, found a large board, and smacked the mule over the head with it, and the mule began to move. The farmer, appalled by the sudden outburst of violence, asked, "What the heck do you think you're doing?" He said, "You just needed to know how to communicate with the animal." "You do," said the neighbor. "But first you've got to get their attention." Spirit, too, has ways of getting our attention, and some are no less subtle than a stout timber to the cranium. Worry not, I will forego the details of my experience other than to say a 15-day hospital stay provides ample opportunity for meditation and reflection. One observation was that none of the extremely valid arguments for my choices changed the eventual trajectory of my experience. The train of events was barreling down the track toward impending disaster, whether my eyes were open or closed. On reflection, had my eyes been focused on a lens other than my ego, opportunities to make more advantageous choices would have been recognized. But that was not the case, and here I am, the product of the consequences. Which brings me to the present, or rather the experience of being forced into recognizing my ego was no longer controlling events. A routine medical appointment where my doctor, upon examining me, announced that I was not going home, but directly to the hospital. EMS had already been called. Decision point, do I fight it or accept it? In that instant, my ego totally deflated. All the good arguments, all the sound reasons for ignoring the signs Spirit had been laying before me no longer mattered. Spirit had my full attention, and it was time to listen. In retrospect, I became aware that I should probably be afraid this was a life-threatening event after all. But that is when I realized that my surrender to Spirit was full and unconditional. There was no fear. Only confidence that the professionals into whose care I had been placed were competent and only concerned with my well-being. In the weeks that followed, I found my body being subjected to treatments that would have been seemed humiliating or at the very least embarrassing had my ego been running the show. However, in the full spirit of Spirit, all judgment had been suspended. The professionals did what the professionals needed to do, and I was just along for the ride, looking forward to the gift shop. The gift I found was myself surrounded by angels, not the harp-playing type, but the type who surround us here in life, dedicated to helping others. Another gift I found was, as I mentioned before, total lack of fear. I had surrendered completely to Spirit, knowing whatever was going to happen, and I had nothing more to say about it. Now, I would like to tell you that having experienced this state of grace, this full and complete union with Spirit, that I'm able to stay there permanently, but as I recover, worldly challenges are creeping back into my experience. The question of what is next looms large on the horizon. How is this disruption in my life going to affect my future? What will the new normal look like? I can put the pieces back together and return to a life similar to what I've been living. However, I can never return to the state of ego I have been maintaining. Of course, I can reinflate my ego, but hopefully will choose not to. So the question of who let the air out? Who deflated my ego enough for me to hear the still small voice of Spirit was in fact Spirit itself. After all, if you've been paying attention to all the lessons here, we know that Spirit is all there is. Even the freedom of choice that allowed my ego to drown out the signals being sent is simply an extension of Spirit. Spirit can inspire us to do great things. We can let it guide our hands and our voices to create beauty, joy, and love. However, Spirit can also hit us upside the head with a piece of lumber to get our attention, and sometimes that is necessary, although unpleasant. It can do so and still demonstrate love and peace. As in my case, where I was forced to accept that I had been refusing the help I had been refusing, and yet experienced no fear and a total sense of peace around the entire experience. As a minister practitioner, it is not unusual to have a client wonder why they do not seem to be getting the results they're expecting. They will exclaim, "I'm setting aside time for meditation every morning and every evening. I am doing treatments. I'm doing all the work required, and yet I still do not seem to be getting any results." They are, in fact, ignoring their radio, refusing to get on the boat, and waving off the helicopter, wondering why their God is not saving them. Their outer proclamation of their faith, their self-confidence, and their infallibility of practice prevents them from recognizing the most imperceivable guidance Spirit provides. My treatment now is that I check the pressure on my ego from time to time and let a little air out occasionally to ensure its roaring voice is not deafening me to the message I truly need to hear. Are you listening to the whisper or overwhelmed by the roar? Thank you for your attention.